Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Lucy Dawson, a sommelier, joins Martin Thorne at Aurora Vineyards to transform his winery. Through collaboration, they create acclaimed wines, rekindle Martin's passion, and find love. Proving challenges can lead to unexpected opportunities. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. Lucy gazed out the window as the clouds split beneath the wing, forming fanciful shapes that brought to mind. Martin Thorne examined some of her childhood drawings across from her. Papers on his tablet, as if unaware of the minor miracle of bin and light. She had accepted the invitation on the spur of the moment while suspended thousands of feet above the ground. Customary prudence. Following the encounter at the coffee shop, where she had debated with herself for hours, creating lists of advantages and disadvantages, and looking up everything she could find online, finally close to midnight, she sent a message about Aurora Vineyards and its mysterious owner. Thorne looked up and said, "I'll be ready at 8. This was his first time on a private jet. Lucy asked, "Is it that obvious?" As he saw her closely examining every aspect of the cabin in his documents. "Only to those who know how to observe," he said with a reserve. As he put his tablet away, stated, "Most people try to act like they're accustomed to it, as though being afraid of the unknown were a sign of weakness. I like your candor." Thorne accepted the flight attendant's offer of mimosas. "Of course, but it's too early for me," Lucy graciously declined, explaining that I would rather keep. Thorne, a true professional, looked at her with renewed interest and said, "My palate is clean if we're visiting a vineyard," remarked without touching his glass. "You're right, of course. Habit sometimes makes us forget the important things." The ensuing quiet was thoughtful rather than awkward. Lucy used the chance to get a closer look at her host. Without the intimidating environment of the Martin Thorne appeared different in the restaurant. His face was defined and angular, displayed minor creases around his eyes that indicated life experiences outside of boardrooms. Despite being strong and graceful, his hands had calluses that weren't consistent with the usual. Executive said, "You work directly in the vineyards," gesturing to his hands, which appeared to be thorny. He was taken aback and then delighted by the observation, which he confirmed 10 years before Aurora. Before vineyards became what they are now, it was just a desolate plot of land that nobody used, wanted in Sussex. "And my dad thought I was crazy for spending all of my money there?" Lucy asked with genuine interest. "That land, why did you do that?" "England isn't precisely renowned for its wines," he replied, his eyes engrossed in the memories. "I had worked in Bordeaux wineries for a year in France, and one evening they tasted I mentioned to an old winemaker that we couldn't make something similar in England. Do you know what I mean? When he told me that wine doesn't come from the earth." Lucy shook her head in curiosity. Thorne recited, "It comes from the sky and the heart of those who cultivate it." Seemed like a kind but meaningless expression until I went back to England and went too beneath its hostile exterior. Sussex had a secret promise appearance. I decided to demonstrate to the world that England could create excellent wines, and his voice was filled with passion that ran counter to everyone's portrayal of the cunning businessman. Lucy was forced to reconsider her preconceptions about him and the reasons. Aurora. When I asked R.A. to recall the name of the vineyard, a shadow appeared on Thorne's face. "It was after a pause, he responded, "sister's name. She passed away from leukemia when I was 20. Always expressed her desire to see the sunrise over vineyards, but she was never able to. Lucy was unsure of how to react to this man's sudden vulnerability. She was troubled by his business empire's disclosure of personal suffering, saying, "I'm responded." Regaining his composure, "I apologize," she finally said. "It was a long time ago." Calm, "But each bottle we make contains at least a little bit of her." Was initially intended. The aircraft started to descend toward Sussex. Through Lucy could see through the window how the semi-arid surroundings contrasted with the deep blue of the English Channel. When a jeep landed, the vineyard was visible from a distance as patches, a vivid green amid the reddish earth. Thorne took the keys from the assistant and waited for them on the tiny private runway, who welcomed them and motioned for Lucy to enter. "I would rather drive through the." As he turned on the engine, he explained that vineyards are the only way to feel. In contrast to European vineyards, the land where the road wound through hills was covered in precisely aligned grapevines. Despite being built with ambition, Aurora Vineyards' centuries-old tradition gave them the vibrant energy of something new. Thorne described as he drove how the 400 acres we had were split up into parcels based on soil type and microclimate. We test both conventional and non-traditional varieties. One idea conceivable in this setting, he paused beside a vine row and got out of the car and asked Lucy to follow him. The sun warmed them up in the morning. These are our Tempranillo vines, and they were pleasant as a cool breeze carried the aroma of the sea and earth. According to all the experts, he caressed the leaves in an almost paternal gesture. Wouldn't work here because of the harsh climate. It took them 3 years, Todab, but they currently yield grapes with a distinct personality. Lucy approached her training enabled her to identify the leaves and the tiny clusters that were starting to form, indications of a robust vineyard. And these were properly maintained, she said, and she was truly impressed. Commitment demonstrates that James, our winemaker, is very skilled technically, Thorne responded, but that's the end of our issue. He can make wine, but Hayes unsure of how to describe it, so they carried on with the tour. Going through, she was shown the modern, effective production facilities in various parts of the vineyard. Thorne. At last, they reached the barrel cellar, a subterranean area with a naturally consistent temperature. The scent of aged wine and oak surrounded Lucy like a comforting hug. She ran her hand over one of the barrels, because this was her element and the world she truly understood. She whispered, "Medium toast," as she felt the French oak wood beneath her fingers. "Amazing," a manly voice from the cellar's entrance said. "Most people don't discern the toast simply by looking." A 50-year-old man came up to them with his eye hand, discolored from handling grapes, and a sun-weathered face revealed years of viticulture. Thorne said, "Lucy, let me introduce you to James Miller, our head winemaker." James shook her hand and said, "This is Lucy Dawson, the sommelier I told you about," firmly assessing her while maintaining a neutral, critical gaze. "Martin told me you possess a remarkable palate," he said, "and if it's okay with you, I'd like to test it." "It would be a pleasure," Lucy answered. Experiencing the well-known thrill of expectation, James took them to a tiny tasting room where they had never encountered an enological challenge before. 3 glasses of unlabeled red wine were waiting on the polished wooden table next to the cellar. "These are 3 of I would like to know what they tell you about our experimental wines," the winemaker explained, and Lucy nodded as she approached the first glass, examining its vivid garnet hue as she held it up to the light. She gently swirled it, enjoying the violet reflections and the way the wine left legs on. She brought her nose to the rim of the glass, which was a sign of its alcoholic content. She closed her eyes to better focus on the aromas, which were mostly Tempranillo with some Sierra. After a brief pause, she mentioned hints of red fruits, spices, and a hint of minerality that must originate from this area's soil and be aged for roughly 15 months in a barrel. James and Martin exchanged a startled expression, and James confirmed that it had been 16 months. "Impressed by your ability to identify the blend with such accuracy," Lucy grinned a little, without being conceited, but conscious of her talent. "The color displays that, but it has an intensity of aroma that indicates the presence of certain, along with the acidity." Andy noticed that the bottle I served Mr. Thorne last had the signature of your vineyard's tannin, alcohol balance. At night, she proceeded to identify the varieties of the other 2 glasses accurately. However, the final wine's aging periods and processes caused her to scowl a little. "This one is intriguing," she said, holding the glass as though it held an enigma. "Is technically flawless, but it lacks a musical element." James was tense, but Martin leaned in, singing all the right notes without showing any emotion. "Intrigued?" he asked. "Explain," adding, "It's difficult to describe." Lucy fumbled for the correct words, as though the wine were hesitant to reveal its all. "The components fruit, wood, and balance are present in a true personality, but they don't communicate or share a narrative. James is our flagship wine," added a defensive edge to his voice, "and Parker awarded it 92 points, and it is technically deserving, Lucy, but its points do not capture a wine's soul," Martin told James. "It's only technical perfection, as I mentioned. Our wines are like my French speeches when they are vindicated. True, but heartless." The winemaker appeared unconvinced but kept after a moment of respectful silence. Lucy realized that James was the meticulous Martin was looking for something, but the artisan was the defender of technical accuracy, a greater sentimental attachment to the item he had made in remembrance of his "What would you do differently, sister?" Martin questioned, staring at her. Lucy gave the question considerable thought, saying, "It was a potential trap. Criticizing too being overly ambiguous could offend James, whose work was excellent. It would initially seem evasive, but I would eventually pay more attention to the land and less to market trends. Retorted that each terroir has a distinct voice, and excellent wines demonstrate not only their skill of their creator, but the nature of their origins appeared to influence James's remarks in his first heat. Asked that defensiveness give way to professional curiosity. Startling Lucy and Martin, and secondly, I would try using more conventional techniques in addition to the contemporary ones. She consistency is great with continued emboldened technology, but occasionally character can be found in flaws. In measured risks, she hesitated, worried that she had said too much. However, the looks on both men's faces inspired her to go on at last, and perhaps most significantly, I would create a genuine story, not a promotional one around every wine, but the actual account of how the hands that grew the grapes of the specific circumstances of the choices made during the winemaking process. That good wine isn't enough for sophisticated consumers. They also want an experience, connection to something greater than themselves. And after she finished speaking, there was a contemplative pause, which James was the first to end, to Lucy's surprise. He acknowledged, "You're right, I've been so obsessed with technical mastery that I've forgotten why I began producing wine in the first place." Martin grinned in an odd combination of a look of contentment and sadness. "Which is why we need you, Lucy," he said, "to affirm the essence of our work." The remainder of the day was spent giving a more thorough tour of the facilities Lucy had seen. Of the vineyard workers were whole families who had spent years working. They studied the history of each plot and the unique soil and climate conditions in viticulture, and the choices that resulted in the planting of specific types in each location. For lunch that a local chef had prepared, customary regional cuisine served with various wines from the vineyard, was served on a terrace overlooking the vineyards in a deep blue sky that seemed to go on forever. Martin inquired as they relished in Finney, "What do you think of our little paradise?" Dessert, a guava flan that went well with a sweet wine from the late harvest. Lucy acknowledged that you've created something, which is impressive. We have produced something extraordinary here which has been corrected as a result of new supplied the funding and the original idea for other people's work. This humility took her aback because it didn't match the description of the brutal businessman everyone gave. Why do she dared to inquire, "You have such an intimidating reputation in the business world." The informality of the situation momentarily removes the obstacles between a prospective employee and their employer. Martin gave the question careful thought while swirling his glass. "Sometimes, people mistake determination for willpower." After a moment, he responded cruelly, "I've definitely made difficult decisions. I've fired employees who didn't share my vision and shut down businesses that couldn't be saved, but always with a higher goal in mind." He stopped to observe the aurora in the vineyards. Always claimed that I had two personalities inside of me, the calculator and the dreamer. The dreamer desired to alter the world, and the calculator recognized that to do so, he would require resources and authority over. I believe the calculator has occupied too much room over the years. And Lucy was shocked by the man seated across from him reflected on his sudden vulnerability. She asked, "What role would I play in all of this?" Since she was much more complicated than she had anticipated, you brought up the director of oenological experience as a professional topic. But Martin clarified his voice. "I want you to help us tell our story because I still don't fully understand what it would entail. Please collaborate with James to create wines that have a passionate tone. They are both emotionally stirring and technically superb. And I want you to redesign the labels and tastings to showcase our wines to the public better." And Lucy noticed that our staff's training is a huge job, which is why he smiled and said, "The salary is commensurate and you would have complete creative independence. I wouldn't meddle in your choices as long as you preserve the spirit of Aurora Vineyards." As the sun started to set, illuminating the vineyards with a golden light that amply supported the location's name, Aurora, the dawn of a new Lucy, finally stated that it's a significant decision, but I need more time to consider it. Martin nodded. "Of course, but there's something to consider before we head back to the city. Otherwise, I'd like to show you that." He guided her up a trail that climbed a hill covered with at the top of the ancient olive trees is a small structure made of wood and stone. He described the Aurora's lookout point as being perfectly situated in the landscape. They came closer, and I placed it precisely where she would have desired to view the vineyards at sunrise. The interior was a circular space with lots of windows that was simple but comfortable, providing a full 360-degree panorama of the vineyard and the area beyond. The English Channel in the middle, 2 glasses and an unlabeled bottle of wine were placed on a wooden table. "This location is," Martin said, "my sanctuary," in a softer tone. "I come here when I need to." He opened the bottle and poured 2 glasses of the deep ruby-colored wine, saying, "Remember why I do what I do," with orange rims, indicating some clarified that this was the first vintage and that we only ever sold a small number of them, bottles that I save for special occasions. Lucy accepted the glass with awe, naturally conscious of the sentimental worth of that wine, which she sniffed, carefully, identifying intricate, when tasting, there are notes of old leather and the sense of ripe fruit and damp earth spices. Although it wasn't flawless, she experienced an unexpected emotion that had ailed her. The tannins had lost their structure over time, and the acidity was slightly elevated. It had a compelling genuineness and sincerity that many other flawless wines were unable to convey. Meant for her to say, "This wine has soul," with genuine admiration. Martin acknowledged that with each bottle, but somewhere in the middle of as the sun began to rise, we lost sight of the accolades and the progress we had made. Painting the sky in shades of red and gold while reflecting on the scene, in a silently exchange of a moment of intimacy that went beyond my work life, Lucy, Martin eventually said, "I'm asking you to help us, rather than merely offering you a job, recover our souls." 3 months later, Lucy reflected on the dawn from Aurora Lookout was holding a hot cup of coffee. It was now her morning ritual, the custom of rising before the sun, climbing a hill, and gradually observing the light changes, the scenery, exposing new aspects of the vineyard every day. Today, for example, she discovered herself reflecting on the peculiar direction her life had taken and how the change had net was simple to say goodbye to her and leave London, the tiny apartment where she had spent years building her life. Every member of the Lato team agreed to a proposal that still sounded too good to be true. Before she left, her grandmother, who possesses wisdom that only years can bestow, told her that sometimes life gives you in a day. "My child, don't question what it has denied you for years. Make sure you deserve it," and she has worked to fulfill that since taking the Director of Analogical Experience position. She put in endless hours at Aurora Vineyards from sunrise to sunset, immersing herself in all facets of the vineyard, from growing to selling. Through her relationship with James was initially tense as she made wine and bottled it, had developed into respect for one another, with the winemaker having conquered his initial mistrust, had discovered a collaborator who complemented him rather than a rival in Lucy, technical perfectionism with the empathy he knew he required. They had started experimenting together with small production batches to that elusive harmony between expressive emotion and technical mastery. However, things were more difficult with Martin after that sunset at the Lookout Point. There was a shift in their relationship that went beyond the professional but meticulously contained. He primarily resided in London, overseeing his other companies, and keeping a professional distance when he visited the vineyard, which occasionally brimmed with unexpected moments of cooperation, a joke that was shared, a look that a cozy silence that lasted longer than needed as they pondered the vineyards. Together, the sound of her thoughts were interrupted by approaching footsteps. She didn't have to turn to see who it was. "Good morning," Martin said. Lucy either stopped next to her and thought about your kingdom, or she grinned at the joke he kept telling her she had conquered the vineyard in record time, gaining the affection and respect of every employee, offering him a sip of her coffee in response. "I'm just trying to figure out what the earth wants to tell us today." As she gave him the cup, she allowed their fingers to touch briefly, contact, but was energized and didn't express any anxiety about the presentation, so he asked to return. Lucy nodded that afternoon, taking the conversation to the professional safe ground. Introduced the recently launched Aurora wine line, which was initially created under her supervision. 28 was an important gathering of specialized journalists, distributors, and critics. Moment for her career as well as the vineyard. She acknowledged that it's much effort packed into a few bottles. "You'll do it brilliantly," he assured her with a conviction that gave her peace of mind. Possess a skill that few others in this field possessed, the ability to listen to wine between them. The phrase "listening to the wine" had taken on the form of a mantra. Lucy had always maintained that her role was to create, not to translate, to understand what the grapes, the land, and the process intended to convey. "When do the visitors arrive?" She changed the topic and said, "The first group lands at 2. To which Martin responded. Jean-Pierre was one of the guests who said, "They'll have time to settle into the hotel before coming here for the tasting at 5. The reputation of a wine could be made or broken by the French critic Dubois. the same man who turned down Lucy's request for an internship at his company years ago, but winery believes she is too English to appreciate the finer points of excellent French wines, and she was aware of the irony. He would now come to us her work. I must verify the last details. She finished her coffee, and Martin nodded. Well, see, regardless of how things turn out, you'll remember that today is a day of celebration. Accomplished in 3 months what I was unable to in 3 years. Lucy walked down the hill with Ash had put her entire being into this, a strange mixture of confidence and anxiety. A project in close collaboration with all process participants. She not only made the wines better, but she also changed how our vineyard introduced the new labels created by a local artist to the world, illustrated each wine story. The Dawn is a combination of Sierra Red and Tempo Anno. Certain parcels of earth, a Cabernet Sauvignon and the crown jewel. Aurora hand-picked grapes from the best parcels were used to make this limited edition wine. A little booklet detailing the vineyard's history and unique features was now included with every bottle. Vintage and English gastronomy-based pairing recommendations. She also oversaw the redesign of the tasting room, which replaced the sterile, pretentious ambience. As is common with many wineries, Lucy had furnished a cozy, welcoming area with local reclaimed woods and other materials that inspired a sense of connection to the earth's off. Lighting and artistic textiles made it possible to appreciate the wines when everything was prepared in the middle of the afternoon. Lucy withdrew to her tiny home to preserve the colors without distortion. She wore a modest yet stylish dress as she changed on the vineyard's edge. She tied her in a burgundy hue that faintly recalled the wines she would offer, putting her hair back in a low bun, just like she did that evening at La Tour when Martin gave her a small token of appreciation for the meeting that had altered her life when her phone vibrated. While she was covertly applying makeup. Her grandmother's message, "Shine as you always have, my child, today." Those words provided her with the necessary serenity. She inhaled deeply and went. The event started on time at 5. With the first voices of arriving guests audible as they made their way to the tasting room. James gave her a kind introduction, emphasizing her education and background, but most importantly, her remarkable aptitude for comprehending the essence of wine naturally. Lucy took over, expressing gratitude for the chance and providing a brief explanation of the news. "We have not attempted to produce wines that mimic the great European classics," she clarified. "We have aimed to convey the distinct character of each bottle reflects the terroir of this frontier region where the sea meets the desert, conveys a tale of harmony and contrast between innovation and tradition." Through the tasting started with the sunrise, then the red earth, and finally Aurora. Lucy presented each wine to the guests, describing not only its organite traits, but also the choices made throughout the winemaking process, the unique aspects of Fayette vintage, and the accounts of those involved. She closely monitored the responses of those in attendance, particularly Jean-Pierre Dubois, whose expressionless face showed the French critic took careful notes on everything he thought, sniffed every wine, but hardly ever interrupted the discussion that had broken out between the other guests who were for the formal presentation. Guests scattered, growing more excited about what they were tasting. Onto the patio to savor a cocktail party with regional fare. Lucy circulated among them, responding to inquiries, getting praise, and establishing beneficial relationships with foreign distributors across the terrace. Martin observed her with a sense of pride as well as something deeper than headed, not mentioned that she had revitalized his vineyard, giving it a new lease on life just as she had fulfilled her promise. But she had also altered his awakening in some way. He believed that years of business pragmatism had buried his emotions. He was so preoccupied with his thoughts that he failed to notice Jean-Pierre Dubois. "Monsieur Thorne," the critic said as he walked up to him in his cool French tone, "have to congratulate you because you have accomplished something truly remarkable." About Lucy and the group, Martin said earnestly, "I just had the good, it made sense to hire her years ago," Dubois said, nodding with a mysterious smile. The Frenchman admitted, "I turned down that young English woman's application for an internship at my winery. Martin surprised me by saying that I didn't think someone with her background could understand the." He took a sip and said, "Small nuances of great wines, how arrogant and foolish I was. This wine has a feature that many French producers share. The aurora is still visible in its glass." He went on to say that it has truth, and doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. With sincerity and fervor, it embraces its territory and its place of origin. Even though the vineyards were dark, the festivities went on under the stars, shone with an unfathomable clarity in contrast to the city, and the thoughtfully positioned lights throughout the Guests were initially formal and reserved, but the enchanted ambience created by the vinaigrette unwound as a result of the wonderful wine and the warmth of Jean-Pierre Dubois was surprised by the ambience Lucy had created, became the party's life. The typically stoic critic recalled stories from his journey through the world's wine regions, which he admitted with unusual humor. Humiliatora had served as a reminder of the reasons behind his initial love for wine. He told a small group that after tasting hundreds of wines annually, there is the risk of losing one's capacity for surprise and forgetting that a great wine must be. Intensely, Lucy moved to a corner of the terrace and watched the scene with a mix of astonishment and contentment. 3 years prior, this same man had fired after making a patronizing remark about her nationality in her application. He raised his glass in a toast, two each time their eyes locked. She said, "Looks like you've conquered the dragon." Behind her, a recognizable voice said, and Martin stood next to her, considering the unique display of the passionate French critic. His face appeared younger and more at ease in the gentle terrace lighting, as though he had changed as a result of the night's success. "It wasn't my intention to conquer anyone," Lucy said earnestly. "I just wanted these wines to tell their true story, and you've succeeded," Martin said. Nodded. "I have pre-orders for half of the Aurora production and the full production." Don Dubois's assistant showed me a portion of his review that he had already written. He gives us 96 points in the preview, which is the highest score he has ever assigned to an English wine. Lucy exhaled a little in relief and contentment. Of course, professional recognition was crucial, but more than that, she felt the profound fulfillment from staying true to her vision and understanding. "We should appropriately honor wine as a cultural and emotional expression," Martin went on. "Will you join me at the lookout point when the party ends?" His tone was almost noticeable weakness that caused Lucy to pay closer attention to him during these 3 months. They had kept a professional distance that occasionally veered into complicity, but they had never crossed the invisible boundary between the personal and professional spheres. "Until now, I'd love to," she said plainly. And the festivities continued until Lucy approached the hotel's final guest as it was getting close to midnight. The night was warm, so she went home to swap her dressy shoes for cozy espadrilles and drape a shawl over her shoulders. On the hill, Martin, however, the sea breeze added a freshness that grew stronger. Held a bottle and 2 glasses as they waited for her at the base of the trail that led to the lookout point. The Aurora they displayed that evening, but Lucy experienced something different. Instantly, realized that they ascended in silence of complicity. Normally austere, the lookout point was only lit by the stars and the full moon had been changed into tiny LED lights that resemble fallen stars. Gently lit the room. A blanket was laid out on the floor, and there were cushions. Unofficially asked them to sit and take in the nighttime scenery when Lucy asked, genuinely surprised that I had my resources, "Did you prepare all this?" With a playful twinkle in his eye, he grinned and said, "Please sit down." Lucy settled onto the blanket as Martin removed the cork from the bottle, which had no label, was inscribed with a symbol that she instantly recognized: a woman's stylized silhouette, surrounded by vineyard. The same emblem that delicately embellished the new labels she created. "What is this?" she asked, intrigued. "My best-kept secret." To which he replied by pouring out. "I started a personal project 5 years ago that involved pouring wine into glasses, just 10 bottles existing in the world." Lucy reverently accepted the glass, sensing that she was holding something unique. Even in the faint moonlight, the wine's hue was a rich garnet, red with violet undertones, suggest a wine that is elegant but full-bodied. She closed her eyes automatically as she brought it to her nose. The odors were fascinating and complex. Mineral notes, ripe dark fruits, a touch of exotic spices, and something else, something that felt oddly familiar and poignant, but that she was unable to identify. "Do you believe?" Martin inquired while closely observing her. "Extraordinary. It tastes different than anything I've ever tasted before. And I recognize the territory of Aurora," she said honestly. "Vineyards, but there's another element that I'm not sure what it is." Martin grinned, pleased with her response. "And 5 years ago," he started to explain, "that I discovered some ancient vines in a deserted area of the vineyard that no one could recall planting, were most likely planted by long before I got there. The original inhabitants of these areas decided to make a wine made only from those grapes, using traditional natural fermentation techniques, manually pressing, aging in buried clay more with wild yeasts." Lucy watched with interest as she went on to examine the aromas and flavors of that special wine, which I kept under wraps as a side project that had called its soul in my mind, but it had nothing to do with the business. he continued, and not even James knew of its existence. I won't label it or make it commercially available, but why didn't, she asked. It might be the greatest wine you've made because I didn't sell it, he said plainly. I created it as a reminder to myself of why I began this, as I adore wine, and now I want to tell you about it. Their eyes locked in the dim light filled with significance. Sharing a glass of wine had an intimate, almost sacred quality that would never be regarded as valuable in the market or judged by critics, Martin remarked. There's something else I want to share with you, just out of love for wine itself. Lucy noticed a change in something that has been on my mind for the past few months. When we first met, she had never noticed a vulnerability in his tone. Instead, I was a man who had forgotten when we reconnected at Lateau. He went on to say, I had turned into exactly what I feared, someone who valued. He stopped, gazing at the vineyards, and said, success is more important than passion, and awards more than authenticity. That extended beneath them, silvered by the moonlight. You brought back memories of the past, significant to me, he remarked quietly. You didn't simply save my wines in any way, you saved me as well. Lucy's chest began to swell with a strong feeling during she had made a concerted effort to control her emotions during these months, persuading herself that the attraction she felt was merely professional admiration for Martin. But right now, beneath the stars, she could no longer fool herself after tasting that exceptional wine on her lips. When you rejected my application 3 years ago, she answered in a hardly audible voice, but I could feel Maya with the world falling apart. I had all my hopes on that chance, but now I recognize that rejection can occasionally serve as a detour to our true place. Martin came slowly and unexpectedly, tenderly took her hand. He said that I made a mistake in judgment 3 years ago, but maybe if we hadn't made this mistake, we wouldn't have reached this point. We must remain silent. He leaned in to give her a tentative, gentle kiss. Lucy initially seemed to be asking if this was correct, but her response cleared up any confusion, intensifying their kiss to convey all of the emotions they had been holding inside for months. When they eventually both were grinning when they were apart, their expressions displaying a mixture of relief and joy, Lucy mentioned, abruptly recalling something I've always wanted to ask you. Did you truly not know how to pronounce Chateau Mont? That evening at Martin's laugh reverberated throughout the evening, and I knew he had confessed. However, I instantly recognized you when I saw you, and I reasoned that if I provoked you, maybe I could see I wanted to meet the real Lucy, so you put on a front of professionalism. She said it was dangerous to act indignantly to provoke me as an ignorant snob, given that I was holding a bottle that might have fallen on your head. It was worth the chance, he said with a soft smile, stroking her cheek, and if you let me, it would still be worthwhile every day to learn more about the true Lucy beneath Sussex's starry sky, encircled by the vineyards they both loved once, sealed the promise of a future together with another kiss, a time in the future when past errors became opportunities, and where wine, like only those who were prepared to hear its story, could truly understand the essence of love. Lucy thought about the sunrise from Aurora's lookout point months later. She was holding a steaming cup of coffee, which had become her morning ritual, climbing the hill before dawn and observing the light's gradual transformation. The vineyard's subtleties are revealed by the landscape every day. Occasionally, such as today, she found herself reflecting on the peculiar turn her life had taken. Leaving London's tiny apartment had not been an easy transition. Bidding farewell to her co-workers at where she had spent years building her life, all to agree to a plan that still seemed too good to be true, even though her grandmother had years of wisdom. Before she left, I told her that sometimes life gives you what you need in a day. My child, don't question it. Make sure you realize that it has denied you for years, deserved it. And she had made an effort to do so ever since taking the directorship. She put forth a lot of effort from her oncological experience at Aurora Vineyards. She immersed herself in every facet of the vineyard from dawn until late at night. From growing to selling by producing and bottling wine initially tense, the relationship with James had developed into one of mutual respect for the wine. After overcoming his initial mistrust, the maker discovered that Lucy was not a rival, but a partner who added a level of sensitivity that he knew he needed to his technical perfectionism. Had started experimenting together with small production batches to achieve that elusive harmony between expressive emotion and technical mastery. However, things were more difficult with Martin after that sunset at the lookout point. There was a shift in their relationship that went beyond the professional but meticulously contained. He spent the majority of his time overseeing his other companies in London, When he went to the vineyard, he kept a professional distance that occasionally broke down due to unexpected moments of cooperation. A shared joke, Orges remained in a relaxed silence for a moment longer than was necessary, thinking about Thevin. Together, when she heard footsteps approaching, she didn't have to look to know who was it. "Good morning," Martin said, pausing next to her and thinking about you kingdom. Your Lucy grinned at the joke. He kept saying she had gained the admiration and respect of every employee by quickly conquering the vineyard while attempting to figure out what. Offering him a sip of her coffee, she responded, "The earth wants to tell us today." As she gave him the cup, he allowed their fingers to touch briefly. Brief encounter, but he was electrified and didn't mention being nervous about the presentation. Lucy nodded that afternoon when asked to bring the discussion back to the secure realm of professionalism. Introduced the recently launched Aurora wine line, which was initially created under her supervision. 28 was an important gathering of specialized journalists, distributors, and critics. Moment for her career as well as the vineyard, she acknowledged. It's so much effort packed into a few bottles. You'll do it brilliantly, he assured her with a conviction that gave her peace of mind. Possess a skill that few others in this field possess, the ability to listen to wine between them. The phrase listening to the wine had taken on the form of a mantra. Lucy had always maintained that her role was to create, not to translate, to understand what the grapes, the land, and the process intended to convey. She changed the topic and asked, "What time do the guests arrive?" Martin said, "The first group lands at 2 o'clock. They'll have time to settle into the hotel before coming here for the tasting at 5. Jean-Pierre Dubois, the French critic, whose assessment could make or ruin a wine's reputation, was one of the attendees. Same man who turned down Lucy's request to work as an intern at his Burgundian winery years ago in English, to appreciate the finer points of excellent French wines. The irony was Noth would now come to assess her work, but she was unaware of it. "I need to check the final details," she said, concluding her coffee, of course. Martin nodded. "Remember that today, regardless of the result, you should celebrate, because in 3 months, you accomplished what I couldn't in 3 years. Lucy walked downhill with an odd mixture of confidence and nervousness. She had poured her heart into this endeavor, closely collaborating with all those involved in the process. She not only enhanced the wines but also changed how Aurora Vineyards introduced its new labels, created by a local artist, to the world. The artist visually depicted each wine's story. The Dawn is a blend of tempo and the crown jewel, Syrah Red Earth, and Cabernet Sauvignon from particular parcels. Aurora, a limited edition wine, is produced using carefully chosen grapes from the fines packages. Each bottle now came with a brief pamphlet detailing Thevin, the unique characteristics of that vintage, and pairing recommendations derived from under her supervision. The tasting room for English cuisine had also been renovated. Of the sterile or pretentious ambience that characterizes many wineries, Lucy harnessed regional resources and accents to create a cozy, welcoming area that evoked a reclaimed woods, handmade textiles, and a connection to the earth-gentle lighting that prevented distortion and allowed for an appreciation of the wine's colors when everything was prepared in the middle of the afternoon. Lucy withdrew to her tiny home on the outskirts of the vineyard. To change, she wore a dress that was understated yet stylish. She tied her in a burgundy hue that faintly recalled the wines she would offer, putting her hair back in a low bun, just like she did that evening at Lato when Martin gave her a small token of appreciation for the meeting that had altered her life when her phone vibrated. While she was covertly applying makeup, her grandmother's message, "Shine as you always have, my child, today." Those words provided her with the necessary serenity. She inhaled deeply, and when the event started on time at 5, with the first voices of arriving guests audible as they made their way to the tasting room, James used kind words to introduce her, stressing not only her education and experience but also her extraordinary ability. Lucy took over instinctively to comprehend the essence of wine, expressing gratitude for that chance and providing a brief explanation of the new Aurora line's guiding principles. Where Haver not aimed to produce wines that mimic the great European classics, she clarified, rather, our objective has been to convey the distinct character of this frontier region's terrain, where the desert each bottle conveys a tale of harmony and contrast between tradition and the sea. Innovation. The tasting started with Red Earth, then Dawn and Aurora. Lucy concluded by taking the guests through each wine and describing not only its traits but also the choices made throughout the winemaking process, the unique aspects of Thate vintage and the accounts of those involved. She paid close attention to their responses of everyone in attendance, particularly Jean-Pierre Dubois, whose expression was sombered. The French critic took careful notes, but he did not share any of his thoughts, sniffed each wine several times, but hardly spoke up in the discussion that had broken out between the other guests who after the official presentation. Guests scattered, growing more excited about what they were tasting, onto the patio to savor a cocktail party with regional fare. Lucy circulated among them, responding to inquiries, getting praise, and establishing beneficial relationships with foreign distributors across the terrace. Martin observed her with a sense of pride as well as something deeper than had not mentioned that she had given his vineyard a makeover and revitalization, precisely as she had promised. But she had also altered his awakening in some way. He believed that years of business pragmatism had buried his emotions. He was so preoccupied with his thoughts that he failed to notice Jean-Pierre Dubois. Mince Thorne, the critic, came up to him and said, "I must," in his calm French, "congratulations. You have accomplished something truly remarkable, and Lucy and the Martin team deserve all the credit." Dubois nodded and said, "I just had the good sense to hire her." Mysterious grin on his face. "That young Englishwoman applied years ago, turned her down for an internship at my winery," the Frenchman admitted, startling Martin. "I didn't think someone with her background could understand the subtleties of great wines." I was conceited and stupid. He sipped from his glass of Aurora. He continued to make this wine, which many French producers have forgotten, has truth. It accepts its origins and doesn't attempt to be something it isn single quotes, T.teroir, and honors it with candor and flair. As night had descended over Theven yards, but as the festivities went on, the stars shone with an unexpected clarity, in contrast to the city, and the carefully positioned lights among the vines produced a mystical ambience. The guests, who had previously been formal and reserved, had become more relaxed as a result of the superb wine and the cozy ambience that Lucy had established. Surprisingly, Jean-Pierre Dubois had emerged as the party's lifeblood. Anecdotes from his travels through wine regions of the world were typically austere, with unusual humility. The world acknowledged that Aurora had reminded him of the reason he fell. When one tastes hundreds of wines annually, they fall in love with wine in the first place. He warned a small group that when you lose your capacity for surprise, you risk forgetting that a great above all, the wine must be emotionally stirring. Lucy, from a terrace corner, viewed the scene with a mix of amazement and satisfaction because 3 years prior, this same man had rejected after making a patronizing remark about her nationality in her application. He raised his glass in a toast to, "Looks like you've conquered the dragon," she said each time their eyes locked. Behind her, a recognizable voice said, and Martin stood next to her. Considering the unique display of the passionate French critic in the hissed face appeared younger and more at ease in the gentle terrace lighting, as though he had been changed by the night's success. "And I didn't mean to overpower anyone," Lucy said earnestly. "I just wanted these wines to tell their true story, and you've succeeded." Martin said, "Yes. I have pre-orders for both half of the Aurora production and the full production." Dawn Dubois's assistant showed me a draft of his review that he had already written. He gives us 96 points in the preview, which is the highest score he has ever assigned to an English wine. Lucy exhaled a little in relief and contentment. Of course, professional recognition was crucial, but more than that, she felt the profound fulfillment from staying true to her vision and understanding we should appropriately honor wine as a cultural and emotional expression. "Would you join me at the lookout point when the party ends?" Martin went on. There was an almost imperceptible vulnerability in his tone that made Lucy examine him more thoroughly. Over these 3 months they had maintained a professional distance that occasionally gave way to complicity, but they had never crossed the invisible boundary between the personal and professional spheres. As of right now, "I'd love to," she said, adding that the festivities continued. Lucy went up until almost midnight, when the hotel's final guests had gone to bed. To her home to put a shawl over her shoulders and swap her dress shoes for cozy The evening the hill was warm, but the sea breeze added a freshness that grew stronger. Martin was waiting for her with a bottle and 2 glasses at the base of the trail that led to the lookout point. Lucy wasn't immediately aware that it wasn't the aurora they had displayed that evening, but rather something else. Climbed in a silent complicity that was only lit by the full moon and the normally austere lookout points. Stars had changed. Little LED lights softly lit the room like a blanket, resembling fallen stars, laid out on the ground with cushions haphazardly arranged to invite them to sight and consider the nighttime scenery. "When did you prepare all this?" Lucy inquired, and she was truly shocked. "I have my sources," he said with a playful twinkle in his eye. "Please take a seat." Lucy sat down on the blanket as Martin opened the bottle, which was labelless, but she instantly recognized the stylized symbol engraved on the cork. Among vineyards, a woman's silhouette is the same symbol that is delicately embellished. What is this? She inquired, intrigued by the new labels she had created. My personal secret, he said, pouring the wine into the glasses. Project I began 5 years ago, and there are only 10 bottles in the world. Lucy took the instinctively sensing that she was holding something unique. She held the glass with reverence. The color of the wine, even beneath the deep garnet red with violet undertones, was visible in the dim moonlight, suggesting a bringing the elegant yet full-bodied wine to her nose. She instinctively closed her eyes, finding the aromas fascinating and complex. Mineral notes, ripe dark fruits, a touch of exotic spices, and something else, something that was unfamiliar to her but felt eerily familiar and poignant. What do you think? Martin questioned, closely observing her. Extraordinary. Differ from anything I've ever tasted before, she said earnestly. Acknowledge Aurora Vineyards territory, but there's something more. Martin grinned, pleased with her response, but he couldn't quite place it. He started to explain 5 years ago that I discovered some ancient vines in a deserted area of it. Is likely that the vineyard that no one recalled planting was planted by long before I got there. The original inhabitants of these areas decided to make a wine made only from those grapes, using traditional natural fermentation techniques, pressing, aging in buried clay, more with wild yeasts. Lucy watched with interest as she went on to examine the aromas and flavors of that special wine, which I kept under wraps as a side project that had, he called it, soul in my mind, but it had nothing to do with the business, he continued, and not even James knew of its existence. I won't label it or make it commercially available, but why didn't, she'll ask. It might be the greatest wine you've made because I didn't sell it, he said plainly. I created it as a reminder to myself of why I began this, as I adore wine, and now I want to share it with you. Their eyes locked in the meaning-filled dim light. Sharing a glass of wine had a personal, almost sacred quality that would never be evaluated by reviewers or appreciated in the marketplace as a wine that existed only. There's something else I want to share with you out of love for wine itself, Martin said after a brief pause. These past few months have been on my mind, and Lucy has noticed a shift in my tone. When we first met, she had never seen a vulnerability in him, or rather I was a man who had forgotten his dreams when we reconnected at Lateau, and he went on to say that I had evolved into someone who valued success over passion. Awards was exactly what I feared. Then genuineness. He stopped and gazed at the vineyards that extended beneath them. You reminded me of what was once important to me in the moonlight, he said quietly. Lucy had an intense feeling that you didn't just save my wines. Somehow you saved me too. During these months, she had attempted to keep her feelings contained, tried to keep her feelings to herself by telling herself that her attraction to Martin was only professional appreciation. But right now, beneath the stars, with the flavor of that exceptional wine on when you rejected my application 3 years ago, she responded, her lips no longer able to fool herself. Her voice was hardly audible, and I felt like my entire world was falling apart. I had put all of my hopes for that chance, but I've come to realize that sometimes being rejected is just a diversion from where we belong. Martin came slowly and unexpectedly, tenderly took her hand. He said that I made a mistake in judgment 3 years ago, but maybe if we hadn't made this mistake, we wouldn't have reached this point. We must remain silent. He leaned in to give her a tentative, gentle kiss. Lucy initially seemed to be asking if this was correct, but her response cleared up any confusion, intensifying their kiss to convey all of the emotions they had been holding inside for months. When they eventually both were grinning when they were apart, their expressions displaying a mixture of relief and joy, Lucy mentioned, abruptly recalling something I've always wanted to ask you. Did you truly not know how to pronounce Chateau? That evening at Martin's laugh reverberated throughout the evening, and I knew he had confessed. However, I instantly recognized you when I saw you, and I wondered if I wanted to meet the real Lucy. So you pretended when I provoked you in the hopes that I could see past the professional facade. She claimed that it was dangerous for her to act like an ignorant snob to agitate me. Given that I was holding a bottle that might have fallen on your head, it was worth the chance, he said with a soft smile, stroking her cheek, and if you let me, it would still be worthwhile every day to learn more about the true Lucy beneath Sussex's starry sky, encircled by the vineyards they both loved. One sealed the promise of a future together with another kiss. Where past errors became opportunities, and where love is like wind disclosed its actual nature only to those who were prepared to hear its tale.